In this video, we'll talk about the basics of umpiring. We'll go through everything that you need to do before you even get to the field, and then how to wrap up your first game as an umpire. Many of the subjects that we'll cover in this video have more in-depth analysis on our channel, so make sure to subscribe and to look for those videos. Let's start with the basic question: what should you wear? There are two categories that you'll need to make sure that you have before your first game. One is your equipment and one is your uniform. Let's start with the uniform. We're using the category of uniform in order to describe anything that both an umpire behind the plate or an umpire on the bases would wear. This includes a hat, shirt, belt, umpire pants, and umpire shoes. You always want your hat to be facing forward, and if you're behind the plate, your mask will fit over a forwards-facing umpire hat. You'll also want to make sure that your shirt is tucked in. You'll need to check this before the game as well as throughout the game, as on plays where you're moving around and making calls, your shirt can become untucked, so make sure that you tuck it back in and that it's securely placed. It's also important to remember that umpire pants generally don't come hemmed. You buy umpire pants solely based on waist size. So make sure that if you're ordering new umpire pants that you have plenty of time to get them hemmed before your game. Let's talk about equipment. Generally, the home plate umpire is the only person wearing any of these things. This is protective gear so that when he's behind the catcher, he won't get hurt or injured by foul balls or missed catches. The umpire gear is an umpire mask, chest protector, shin guards, and then extra protection for umpire plate shoes. He'll also need a ball bag and indicator as well as a plate brush. Now we've talked about the uniform, let's talk about before the game even begins. What are your responsibilities? First, and sort of obviously, be there on time. And on time for an umpire is 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes early. That way you have enough time to get dressed and ready and to get onto the field before this next step. The next step is to have the pregame meeting. What you'll do is you'll get to the field and you'll call over the head coaches of each team. You'll have a meeting for about 1 to 2 minutes before the game in order to discuss 3 things. These 3 things are an introduction and exchange of names. You'll talk about the field conditions and any ground rules for this particular field. All of these things should be done and talked about in about 1 to 2 minutes. Make sure that the plate meeting isn't too long so that you're now cutting into game time, but it's also not so short that you didn't talk about everything that you needed to talk about. Next, how do you even start the game? Well, what you want to do is make sure that all the players are in their proper positions. So the home team is out in the field and they're all at their proper places, and that the away team has a batter in the box, a batter on deck, and everyone else is in the dugout. You'll get behind home plate, behind the catcher, in your ready position, and you'll point to the pitcher and say, "Play ball!" If your game has a time limit, such as in a house league or tournament, make sure that the start time is documented by one or both of the scorekeepers for each team. You'll also need to make sure that you are given game balls before the game. Sometimes this comes from the home coach, sometimes each team provides 1 ball, sometimes the tournament director will give you the game balls, but make sure that you have game balls before the game to keep in your ball bags and to give 1 to the starting pitcher. Let's talk about positioning. Where are you supposed to stand? If you're behind home plate, then at the start of every play, you're going to be in the slot position. This means that you're in the position between the catcher and the batter in order to see the strike zone. There's a few general guidelines that you'll want to follow when in the slot position. The first is that you want to be as close to the catcher as possible without interfering with their throws or with their catches. That way you can see the entirety of the strike zone as well as the ground beneath the catcher. You'll need to be able to see both in order to call ball and strike, but also to see foul tips and drop thirds. Another way to make sure this is true is to keep your chin above the top of the catcher's helmet. That way the catcher's head isn't coming into your vision and blocking your view of the strike zone or the ground. That's for when you're calling ball and strike, but what happens when there's a play on the bases? Whenever the plate umpire is coming out to make plays on the bases, especially in a solo game, they want to move toward what's called an interior diamond, which is that if you take the normal baseball diamond and you make a smaller baseball diamond in between, this is the places that you'll want to move to in order to make calls on the bases. These are the prime places to be in case the play changes and you need to make a call at a different base than the one that you were originally anticipating. You're not too far away from the base in order to get a good view and to make a good call. That covers positioning, but now let's talk about the strike zone. In high school rules, the strike zone is defined as the area above home plate, the height being from the bottom of the batter's knees, and the top being the midway point between the player's armpit and waist. It's important to note though that for younger levels you may want to make this a little bit bigger, especially for 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, and especially for in-house leagues. You want to add a couple of inches to the edges of home plate and make it a little bit wider and definitely a little bit taller. At this point, kids are still learning how to swing, what's a strike, and how to hit the ball. And if you're calling something too tight, then both the pitcher will not be able to hit it and the batter will never learn to hit a strike because they're going to walk every single time. Your strike calls should be one of your loudest calls and your ball calls should be one of your quietest. There's 2 steps to a strike call mechanic. You'll want to stand up and do what's called clearing the catcher, which means that you move back from the catcher so that you're not in his way and you're also coming up to your full height, and then you'll want to do your strike call. Whether you're an umpire that points out to the side or comes up with a fist for the strike call, you still want to follow that first step, which is that you want to clear the catcher and stand all the way up. As you're doing your point or your fist is when you'll want to yell strike very loudly and very clearly. When you're calling ball, you simply stay crouched down in the slot position and you say the word ball. This is something that really only the batter, the catcher, and maybe the pitcher should be hearing. That's ball and strike, but let's talk about safe and out. First, where should you even be looking on a safe and out call? There's a process that the umpire should follow when tracking the play in order to make a safe or out call. The first step, the umpire needs to watch the ball leave the hitter's bat. The ball will then roll across the infield and then into a fielder's glove. Throughout this entire time, you should still be watching the ball. You should not be watching the runner. You can keep a peripheral out in order to look for interference or obstruction, but you're still watching the ball and watching the fielder make the play. As the fielder picks up the ball and throws the ball, you're still watching the fielder and still watching the baseball. It is only until the ball is in the air moving towards the base that you're now going to shift your vision towards the base that the play is going to be made at. From then you'll watch the bag and keep the catch in your peripheral. Once the runner has crossed the bag, then you want to pause and look for voluntary release. Remember, you don't have a catch until you have voluntary release from the player. This is covered in one of our other videos on baseball rule misconceptions. Once you for sure have voluntary release, you have a complete catch and the player is out, only then are you able to signal out. When you're signaling out, you'll make a fist and you'll have your arm in a 90-degree angle above your head. If it's a safe call, you still want to follow the same process as in the out call, especially still waiting for the play to be complete. For the safe call, you want your arms to start from the middle of your chest and move outwards, parallel to the ground. You'll also want to emphasize safe and out calls differently depending on how close the play is. If it's a bang-bang play that's super close and could go either way, you'll want to be super loud and very emphatic so that you can sell what you saw to everyone else on the baseball field. If everyone on the baseball field can tell that he's safe or out, simply give the signal and then move back to your position. Let's talk about fair and foul. The signals for fair and foul are very simple. If it's a foul ball, you'll simply put both hands up into the air and say foul ball. And if it's a fair ball, you'll simply point in the direction of fair territory. When you're positioning for fair and foul, what you'll want to do is move so that you're looking straight down the fair and foul line and can see where the ball lands or where it crosses the first or third base bag. Remember that if a ball hits first or third base, it's still a fair ball. Those are some basic calls that every umpire will have to make in their first game. But now, how do you conclude the game? Well, once you've reached the end of the time limit or you've played all of the innings, what you'll do is both teams will come out and shake hands and you'll put all of the game balls on home plate and you'll exit the field. Rarely do you want to stay on the field and talk with the players and coaches because generally speaking, you're opening yourself up for criticism or an altercation. It's better to remain professional, leave the baseballs on the field, say good game if players come up to you, and then leave. Hopefully all this information will be helpful for you to umpire your first baseball game. Subscribe to our channel if you want to see more in-depth videos on many of these subjects, and leave a like and a comment.